Hello again, Michael Ware with the Iowa Firearms Coalition, our IFC Warrior Wednesday. We have Dr. T.C. Fuller. I'll refer to him as TC the rest of the program. Hold on. Strap in. If you're driving down the road, put your seatbelt on if you don't already have it. If you're sitting in your easy chair, lean back and dig your fingernails in deep. I think that this is going to be a lot of fun. And oh, by the way, I'm seriously considering, based on who TC is, I'm seriously considering stopping talking pretty quick and maybe covering up my screen, because as an FBI interrogator, I'm going to give it all away. I'm sure he's already read me and assessed me by now. These guys are really good at what they do. But first, I want you to always thank you all for listening. Go to iowafc.org. We need your membership. As part of membership, there's a group of trusted partners there that are offering tangible goods, discounts, that kind of stuff, because they support the people that support us and support the Second Amendment. So be sure to go there, do that. We need your membership, and there are really a ton of perks associated with IFC membership now. Take advantage of those. Also, hit the store. Our 9-line apparel shirts are up and ready to go. They ship direct from Brownells. If you hit that link, you can grab those, put them in your cart, and get them sent right to your door. We appreciate the collaboration with Brownells and the collaboration with 9-line. So quality stuff made in America by veterans. It's a really good program. Now, as I said before, I'm going to let TC make his introduction. He knows who he is better than I do. I will jump right in this conversation. So thank you for coming on. Welcome, Dr. TC Fuller. Tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, thank you for having me on, Mr. Ware. I really appreciate it. I was a Second Amendment absolutist and a huge fan of firearms ownership in general. I was really excited to be invited on your show, and I'm happy to do whatever I can to support you in your mission. Where to start? I guess originally I was born and raised in California. That's how old I am. That's where I learned to shoot, as odd as that may sound. Spent my first 23 years there, generally speaking. Lived outside the state a couple times for short periods. Went to University of California at Santa Cruz, did a year there, and then surfing and volleyball and chasing girls resulted in me being invited to pursue my academic career elsewhere. So I moved down to Fresno State, where I finished up there, graduated number 1 in my ROTC class, and headed off to a regular Army commission in the United States Army as an infantry officer after having done about 4 years in the National Guard while I was finishing up college. Was headed off to the Berlin Brigade when I got sidetracked by Saddam Hussein's little foray into Kuwait, and ended up over there for the first Gulf War. I was an infantry platoon leader for that little shindig after my mandatory year of normal training down at Fort Benning. Finished that up, went back to Germany, finished up my time there, came back home, I was involved in what they call the branch detail program at the time. So I was going to be involuntarily transferred into the Ordnance Corps. I didn't really want to do that, so I applied for Special Forces training, and I applied for Explosive Ordnance Disposal training. And the first one that came through was EOD, so I split the scene and got into the EOD program and was promptly rewarded by a return to the Middle East, where I did another year in the Sinai Desert, diffusing bombs and blowing stuff up for fun, and not much profit, but it was a lot of fun. After that, came home, was at Fort Bragg, North Carolina for a while, and applied to the FBI, never thinking that they would hire me, because I was always led to believe they hired adults. But in fact, they did hire me. I was about as shocked as you could get, but nonetheless, they made the offer and I took it because I could read a pay chart, and I saw what they were paying FBI agents, and I saw what they were paying Army captains, and I thought, I think I'm going to go where the money is. So I ended up doing 20 years in the FBI after that. I asked to go home to San Francisco Bay Area, so naturally they sent me to Burlington, Vermont. Mm-hmm. I did about 10 years up there and was able to, on my nights and weekends, finish up a master's degree and then a doctorate, finished that out, left there, went down to New York for a little while. I was a principal firearms instructor in the Albany division for a while. While I was in Vermont, I picked up IDPA. I was the first masterclass shooter in IDPA that I know of, at least. Did that for a while, competed at the Nationals a few times, all over regional events, state events, did some IPSC as well. and then became a firearms instructor with the FBI, then became the principal firearms instructor, as I mentioned, down in Albany. From there, I went down to Quantico. I managed to wrangle a promotion and went to Quantico as a firearms instructor there. So I was a full-time GS-14 firearms instructor, walked around all day, every day, 50, 60 hours a week. Side alignment trigger control, lads. And that was my gig for a while. That was fun. Talk about your master's degree in firearms instruction, because I worked with some really phenomenal people down there, and that was it. From there, I went up to the Office of Congressional Affairs in D.C. out of FBI headquarters. It's a special plane of hell, I got to be honest. If you really want to see how the sausage is made, that was the place to do it. And
what was that again? It was called what?
The Office of Congressional Affairs.
Okay.
So did a lot of time up on Capitol Hill, taking FBI senior managers up there to various committee meetings to testify, and sat in on some really interesting briefings. I was never a player in that realm, but I was the escort, if you will. They didn't know where to park. I knew where to park. They couldn't take their guns. I could take my guns. That kind of thing, passing on clearances, dealing with Congress, dealing with congressional members. If you ever end up reading my book, Painting Over Rust, I got in a bit of trouble almost on my first day with Nancy Pelosi. That was kind of funny in hindsight. At the moment, it wasn't a lot of fun, but in hindsight, it's hysterical. Anyhow, from there, I ended up coming down to Charlotte, North Carolina, and I finished up my last remaining few years in the FBI at Charlotte, where I did a variety of jobs. At that point, I was a pretty senior guy, and so I was working counterterrorism a lot, both domestic and international. I was a crisis management coordinator. I was a university liaison, that kind of thing. A lot of secondary jobs.
Yeah.
Over the course of my career, I also did time in Afghanistan with the FBI. I did time in Cuba with the FBI. Got to see a lot and do a lot, and finally finished up just right about 8 years ago, just 4 days ago. And since then, I've been running my own consulting firm and writing some books and just enjoying myself. What time I've got left.
Fantastic. Wow. You've done a few things. That's quite a list of, I'm assuming it's safe to call all those things accomplishments, or at least duties. I like that. Now, let me grab my pen here. I got to write something down. Take pot shots at government of office. What was it? Government what?
Office of Congressional Affairs, OCA.
Congressional Affairs, OCA. Take pot shots routinely with enthusiasm and zeal. Okay. I'll add that to my list. That's fun. I hadn't thought about anything like that in a long time. Okay, so I'm curious, how does this start? I mean, you're a young man and you're like, hey, volleyball is the most fun I've ever had. I want to end up in Gitmo. I mean, those things seem very far apart. So walk us through what the motivation is there.
Well, that's a very, very insightful question. And how does one go from there, from A to B? By the time I was done with my freshman year of college, I had hair past my shoulders, had a fantastic tan. I had a vicious volleyball game. I was surfing a lot. But I've always been, a right of center libertarian kind of guy. And, all of my heroes, I come from a broken home and a single mom. And, she passed when I was 10 years old. So it was a big mess when I was a kid. So my heroes weren't people in my life. The heroes that I had growing up were John Wayne, and they were Burt Lancaster, and they were Clint Eastwood, and they were a lot of times law enforcement characters, a lot of times military characters. I did a lot of reading. I retreated to books as a child and read a lot about Second World War in particular. By the time I was in 8th grade, I probably knew more about Guadalcanal than your average Marine. Knew more about the 8th Air Force than probably your average Air Force guy. And that was sort of in the back of my head my whole life growing up, was that's where I want to end up. I would like to end up, I really wanted to fly fighters, but I ended up with bad eyes. So that was the end of that. LASIK wasn't a thing when you and I didn't have gray hair. So that was off the table, and eventually wandered into the Army. But I had a good friend at the time, and we're still good friends to this day, I shouldn't say at the time, who went into Fresno State's ROTC program and was constantly whispering, hey, come with me. You should do this. And he talked me into it. And we had a great time. And he eventually stayed out of the military active side and went into academia. And I kind of stuck with it. Because once I hit the military, I really took off. That was that really seemed to resonate with me. And it really, spoke to me. And I did really well at it. I don't think I'm being pretentious to say that, but I did real well, and I had a good time. I enjoyed it. It made sense to me. It clicked with sort of my internal machinery, and I was chugging right along. I thought, this is it. This is where I'll be. This is my calling. And
I don't hear many in between stories about the military from the people that I talk with. I have people that say, I didn't care for it. It wasn't for me. I'm not sorry about my service, but I didn't particularly enjoy the military. And oh, by the way, I didn't like being owned and some of those things. And then there are other people that are like, I excelled as a soldier. I enjoyed it. The regimented day was good for me. I excelled through rank and with all these other things. And so it doesn't seem like there's a lot in between. It's either for you or it's not. And I do talk with people who are very, very happy about ROTC and joining some of those programs. Like, hey, I got a great education, started off in life with meaning and purpose, and it laid the foundation for a tremendous adult life. So I'm interested to hear people's stories about that. So was an ROTC an actual draw for you, or was well, let me just start right there. Was the ROTC itself the draw for you or not?
The draw for me was the military, and then my buddy was in ROTC, and that was the sort of entree. I didn't really know a lot about it, frankly. Okay. I had no adult figures of any import in my life that were giving me guidance. I didn't realize that, for example, that college loans were a thing. I was, working full time trying to put myself through college. When halfway through my freshman year, I found out about college loans. I'm like, wait, what? Mm-hmm. So I didn't have a whole lot of guidance in that regard. I didn't have a whole lot of guidance in regard to what precisely ROTC was. But I will tell you that, after one National Guard drill where, a couple of NCOs got drunk, puked on the floor in the bathroom, and I had to go mop the latrine while watching officers stand in the corner, drink coffee, and laugh, I was like, yeah, this mop and latrine thing, I'd rather go over there and stand in those guys. And then I saw a pay chart, and I was like, oh, hey, look at this. These guys get paid better than I do. What the hell? Yeah. But the military was a big draw for me. ROTC was sort of an on-ramp that a friend of mine introduced me to. And that worked out really, really well for me. And to the point you just made, it did give me a foundation that I was lacking. It did give me a purpose that I was lacking. It did give me a sense of discipline that I was lacking in. And these things I clearly needed and thrived under. So it worked out really well for me. And then the ramp from there to the FBI was largely my wife at the time and my daughter. I was noticing that, my daughter was 5 and I'd been gone for 3 years of those 5. And the calculus in my head was not going to result in the kind of daughter that I really wanted to have in the house if I wasn't going to be around. If I wanted to be an absentee father, I wouldn't have gotten married. So the FBI application was really a sop to my wife. Because I figured, I'll apply, I'll make a good faith effort. They won't hire me, and I'll be able to say, hey, I'll be able to seize the moral high ground and say, I tried. Yeah, I failed, but I tried.
You saw me turn in the application. You were there. Yeah,
you were there. You watched me take the test. But it turned out that I actually got in. So who knows?
Are you at liberty to explain to us what? I mean, I don't know if there are any people that have aspirations to go into that level, if you want to call it, of law enforcement or that kind of work. But what is FBI looking for, or what are they not looking for? Maybe those are both questions.
Well, what they're not looking for, I think, is the easy ground ball. You can't be a crook, you can't be a criminal. I mean, and I recognize there are going to be people that have very, very strong feelings for and against the FBI. Probably some in your audience, and that's fine. I think that's great. I've been described on another podcast as an FBI shill, which I kind of find funny because I don't self-define that way. But to answer your question, you can't be a crook. You have to be a generally honest person. You have to be an ethical person. And then, there are some very objective standards. And again, I lay them out pretty solid in my book, Painting Over Rust. But generally speaking, you have to have a 4-year degree. You have to have at least a 3-year full-time work history. And there's some other things. You have to have a driver's license. You can't have a criminal record. You can't have recent drug use. When I applied, you couldn't have any drug use. But now I think they've softened the edges on that. There's a physical training standard you have to meet that seems to be getting a lot of people these days. As odd as it may sound to the gray-haired amongst us, people will apply to these jobs knowing there's a PT standard, having a published PT standard in hand. It's a quiz that you have the answers to before you get there, and they'll fail the test, because they can't run a mile and a half in, 4 days or whatever ridiculously low standard they have. But the PT standard gets people. And then you have to, there's a background check, because the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So, if you've been running around being a scumbag for the last 30 years, that's a pretty good indication that it's an uphill battle for you to not be a scumbag in the next 30 years. And you can't go around hiring people with poor moral fiber and poor respect for the law and then give them the kind of authority that an FBI agent wields. You just can't do it, because when it happens and you've got an organization of 30,000 people, 13,000 or so agents, give or take, so it's going to happen occasionally. Someone's going to sneak through. But when it happens, it's catastrophic. We see it all the time. And when we see it, I like to think that we go and we get them. Now, there's misbehavior and there's illegal behavior. Illegal behavior gets you crushed. Misbehavior far too often can be subject to political interpretation, and then it's a matter of who's in office and are your screw-ups their kind of screw-ups.
Right.
And we can kick that ball around all you want. But generally speaking, that's what you need to do. Statistically speaking, your odds are much better to get into Harvard than they are to get into the FBI, which is weird because I could never have gotten into Harvard, which is odd to me. But nonetheless.
Is it easier now because of okay, let me lay this foundationally, and then maybe you can let me know if you think that it applies to FBI. A friend of mine's in law enforcement. We've been buddies for 2 decades. And he told me that when he went to apply for the job in working for the department he still works for today, he said there were 200 and some applicants for 2 slots. And he said it was very competitive. And he said, I ran to be ready, to ace a PT test and all these other things. And he said, and I was fortunate enough to be selected. He said, we did a round of employment the other day for 2 slots, same department. It's a semi-metropolitan area. It's grown a little bit, but not by leaps and bounds. And he said we had 7 applicants. 3 people showed up. And he said one of them literally got high in the parking lot and came in there reeking of marijuana. And they're like, you realize that you're asking to be a law enforcement officer specifically to take care of the things that you did in the parking lot that are not legal in the state. Well, I wanted to be kind of calmed down. I didn't want to be all nervous for my interview. The guy was like, get out of here. So now they were down to 2 applicants for 2 slots with no small irony. If I remember what he told me right, I think I'm right in saying this, they hired neither of them. They couldn't fill the slots. I'm assuming that they eventually did, but there are so few people qualified or desiring to work in law enforcement coming forward. I think it's relatively safe to say that not all, but many departments are drastically lowering their standards. Is that true at a federal level, do you think?
I can't speak for all federal departments, obviously, but I can speak with some level of assurance around the FBI. For a while, I was an applicant coordinator for the Albany division of the FBI. So I was intimately involved in the recruitment process and the processing of new agent applicants into the FBI. Under the current director and under the current president, to go back a little longer, there's been a real downturn in the respect levels that we've seen paid by outside organizations, agencies, and people to the FBI and to law enforcement in general. And this isn't a big shock, I think, to anybody. You've seen a lot of folks that have really, really been down on the. Let's just talk about the FBI. Let's stick to what I know. There's been a lot of denigration of the FBI, whether deserved or not. It's not the point. The point is when you have the president of the United States saying bad things about the FBI, it's going to have an impact on their reputation. When you have a current director of the FBI who prior to taking office as the director made quite a bit of hay from denigrating the reputation of the FBI, it's going to have an impact on the FBI. And that is exactly what you've seen on the FBI specifically. And to your point, law enforcement in general, the profession has taken a significant reputational hit in the last 10 or 15 years. And that has translated into many things, but one of them is a plummeting of numbers of applicants. In a typical year back when I was applying, the FBI would get 100,000 applicants for 1,000 jobs. Wow. Yeah. So you're talking about in a given year, somewhere in the neighborhood of 100,000, give or take. And those are just the people that actually, showed up and took the different called and started the process and went through it. By the time you got to actually people doing paperwork to get into the FBI, actually filling out applications, you were looking at about 66 people for every one person they actually hired. So the numbers were phenomenal. And as a result, the FBI could take the minimum standards that I described for you earlier in the show and say, those are the minimums. But if you have a 4-year degree and all these other qualifications, and the guy next to you has a doctorate in chemical engineering and all these qualifications, who gets the gig? All things being equal, the standards are going to float upwards. And I've talked to local and state law enforcement officers that have had similar experiences over the last year, in that it used to be big and fat and happy, like you were describing, your friend had the experience of. Now, with those reputational hits being made, with people being asked to do things in the FBI that they're not exactly comfortable with doing, both under the last administration and this administration, you've got people that are really, really hesitant for a lot of reasons to come in. Mm-hmm. The Bureau tends to be a second career for most folks. Mm-hmm. The average hiring age in the FBI is 30. So this is a cohort of people that are already being successful in their current careers, right? Because you're not getting hired by the Bureau if you're a dud in your current job.
I don't think that people understand that, and I shouldn't interrupt, and I'll let you get right back to it. But I have many friends in law enforcement that have made their way from local law enforcement, if you will, into federal through collaborations with their department. Let's say that, hey, I've got an ICE group operating here, or there's some DEA guys or ATF or whatever they may be, and I get put on, I don't know what you'd call it, a task force, or I'm on loan to them for a little while. And the next thing you know, they extend me the courtesy of, hey, would you like to hire on? Because they've worked together and they're a known quantity, whatever else. That's not uncommon at all. And of course, in every case that I can think of, every one of those guys got hired on eventually. And of course, they were reassigned somewhere far, far from here. I don't know if that's as common now. I'm hearing that's not quite as stringent as it used to be, but it's not uncommon, obviously, for people to do a lot of work side by side or being cherry picked out of current law enforcement. So if you're thinking, I'm going to finish high school, I'll grab a degree, and I'll be a federal employee by the time I'm 23 or 24 years old, I don't know if that ever happens.
We had a kid in my class that was 25 at the academy, and he was about a unicorn. He was a very rare person. It just doesn't happen very often because you don't have the experience level and, frankly, the maturity. I mean, if I think about the decisions I was making at 23 versus the ones I was making at 33, they were vastly different. And yet the military thought it was a good idea to give me a Bradley and 30 guys and tell me to charge north when I was 23.
There's strength in numbers. Yeah. You were the only guy in a Bradley. It's okay.
I wasn't. I had a bunch of 18-year-olds with me, so I was the old guy. But you understand what I'm saying. It's just there's a maturity level of difference, and they select for that. And picking up people off of task forces is a time-honored tradition. I don't want to make it sound like you're on a task force with the Marshal Service and they hire you and tomorrow you go to the academy. There's still a process you have to go through. But if you're an unknown quantity applying for that job versus a guy that we've been working with, and oh, by the way, your packet includes 3 letters from current employees who have good reputations that are doing great things, who've seen your work, seen you do the job, which one packs more weight, right? So that's not unusual in the slightest. And all of us do it because, frankly, every organization is looking for the best people they can get. So if they can vet you through a couple years on a task force and see, hey, look, this guy's really strong. This girl's really strong. She does these things really, really well. This is a person that would be a real good addition to the Secret Service, the Marshal Service, the FBI. We should recruit them. And those conversations happen. So that's not in the slightest unusual. So I'm glad it's still happening. But what you are seeing is a lot of people, to the point I was trying to make originally, was because people are in a career when they typically apply to a federal agency, FBI in particular, it's a big leap, right? I mean, in my case, I was being very, very successful in the Army. I was a captain promotable. I was looking at major. I was looking at, making the climb. I'd been in a peacekeeping force. I'd been in combat. I checked all the school blocks that I needed to check. I was on my way. So asking me to stop that and jump into the unknown of the FBI and start over at ground zero, it's a big ask. Yeah. And a lot of people used to do it for a lot of reasons, one of which was the reputation of the organization. Now that has become weakened. That reputational piece. And it's a volatile political environment. The FBI is getting beat up a lot. FBI agents are being fired, I would argue, capriciously by the director right now. Why would I give up the security and safety of a job I've been doing for 5-10 years to jump into that environment? And oh, by the way, I live here 2 blocks from my aging parents, or 2 miles from my aging parents. And now I'm going to, go from Iowa. You're going to put me in Miami, or you're going to put me in Guam, or you're going to put me in Maine, all of which is a possibility, right? I asked to go to San Francisco, and I ended up in 30 miles from the Canadian border in Vermont. I don't know if you have any idea what it's like growing up on a beach in California and then moving to a snowbank 9 months out of the year, but I'm here to tell you, it's a shock. It's a shock.
You don't catch as many sand volleyball courts in Vermont, I don't suppose.
God knows I so looked, but nonetheless, you make do. So what we're seeing now is like the FBI is a couple thousand people short of their personnel manning levels as of, I guess, right about now, if rumors are to be believed, because they just can't recruit them. And they're not trying to drop the standard. Now, the director has come up with some interesting ideas on how he wants to recruit and hire some people, but because the FBI standards are what they are, the recruiting numbers that he was trying to get haven't been hit simply because people, they don't make the standard. And I'm not trying to make an argument that one organization is better than another. But what I am going to say is standards are different. So the hiring standard for my local sheriff's department here in the Carolinas are different from the hiring standards of the FBI.
Oh, yeah.
And that's not to denigrate anybody. I mean, people have asked me for years, weren't you ever a local cop? And mind you, I was a combat infantryman. I was a bomb disposal guy. And my answer is always the same. Being a local cop was too dangerous for me. It's just far too dangerous. And so it takes a different personality and skill set.
Oh, without a doubt. And from what I can tell, and it's been a little while since I asked these specific questions, so I'll admit that my information's a little dated. I don't mean decades, but maybe by a year or two. But the last time that I asked a series of these questions to these many friends or colleagues, if you will, people in these circles I run in, they're telling me that these agencies are chronically understaffed. Like I've got a really good friend who's an ATF agent and a really good friend recently retired from Secret Service, and he was a sniper and sniper instructor, all that kind of stuff. And so, I mean, he's been there and done that in a lot of circles within Secret Service. And he's like, listen, he's like, he says, I don't remember ever having a full staff in my entire 25 years here. He's like, and he said, it's this bad now as it's ever been. We can't get anybody that really wants to do this, that are truly, really qualified. And so we haven't lowered our standards really. We just operate very thin. And it seems like it's that way across the board. Is that true in your experience?
It seems to be. Now, I will say this, the FBI, we were rarely significantly understaffed. Because as difficult as it is to get in Secret Service, ATF, Marshal Service, pick one, we would recruit from them as well. We had a guy in my academy class that we started on Monday or showed up on Sunday. He, until Friday, was working as a Secret Service special agent. Quit Friday, started with the FBI on Sunday.
Yeah.
I've heard of people going the other route, but incredibly rarely. incredibly rarely. The FBI also has an advantage, or at least had an advantage over some of the other organizations, because our pay was just a slight bit better. What we called a journeyman level was a GS-13. I know for a long time, ATF and Marshal Service were fighting to get that journeyman level up to 13, GS-13, and they couldn't. And the pay, that makes a difference. It's hard to argue to mama, well, I'm going to stay here because I like this job, but you could be doing that job and making another 20, 30 grand a year. Yeah, but I really like this job. You can have those conversations. They're just not easy.
Yeah.
But it is better, I think, as your friend pointed out, to work thin than it is to work fat, but with substandard people.
Yeah, apparently. Well, I think that's true across the board. I don't care what line of work, if you want to call it that you're in. You'd rather have the right people than have plenty and many of them be the wrong people. That's not a welcome problem to have. Right. And it is a problem. It's legitimately a problem.
It is. I mean, at the end of the day, federal law enforcement or any law enforcement, it's a dangerous job. And people that don't meet the standards shouldn't be there for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is they tend to get people hurt or killed, including themselves. Then there's also the case law issues, right? They make bad arrests, they make bad cases, they don't make cases. There's a whole lot of reasons. And then you end up with bad case law. You end up with appeals that don't go your way because somebody did something overzealous or they did something incompetent. So it's just best to man the walls in the first place. Any Hollywood movie you watch will make you think that the FBI Academy is all about drumming people out and we're only going to have the last. This is not buds. Okay. This is not SEAL selection. Okay. Where they stop you is at the walls. Once you get inside the organization, they've already spent $50,000 to $100,000 on getting you in that seat in terms of background, medical checks, and all the other falderall that goes with getting you in that chair. They don't want to lose you at that point, right? You represent a significant investment. Now, I did 5 years at the academy. We did throw people out of the academy. We really did, but it was noticeably rare. Now, some of us would argue it should have been more common, but that's always what old guys say. Oh, back in my day, it was tougher. Not these young whippersnappers. They just don't know what difficult is.
Yeah.
So there is a bit of a difference between the reality and what Hollywood would have you believe. But you can't overstate the importance of getting the right people into any of these federal law enforcement jobs. The job is too powerful, right? I mean, if you have corrupt, incompetent people in those positions, the damage they can do it's catastrophic. And it's best to just avoid that problem completely for everyone involved.
Did you ever come up against any, how would I say this, guff for being a Second Amendment advocate, supporter? And the reason I say that is, we talked a little bit about ROTC or some of these agents that I've known as some of these folks that have dedicated themselves to that level of service. And they're always telling me, listen, it's about half and half. The ATF agent, that's a buddy of mine. He's like, ATF's half and half. I said, well, I don't even know what that means. He said half are rabidly anti-gun and half are pro Second Amendment patriots. And he's like, there's no middle ground. And he said, it doesn't seem like there's more of one than the other. He's like, I work side by side with people who absolutely will argue tooth and nail for the Second Amendment. I work alongside people that are elated and getting their thumb on a dealer and running them out of business. I'm like, okay, well, I think I dislike half of what you just said. So where did you find yourself in your period or your time?
Well, I always flew my flag pretty proudly, so I didn't catch a lot of guff, and I tend to know what I'm talking about or I don't talk about it. And by way of establishing my bona fides here, I mean, I don't know if you know Andrew Bronca or not. He does the Law Self-Defense show, very, very far right, pro-gun guy. He was the best man at my wedding. Andrew and I have been friends for 30 years. And I was the best man at his wedding. We're really tight. We met at Smith & Wesson IDPA Winter Nationals in the late 90s. We were on the same squad together. I've always been the go-to guy on my squad for guns. We had a go-to guy for weights on my squad in Vermont. I mean, the guy could bench press a Buick. And he was the go-to guy. If you had a PT question, you asked him. I was the gun guy. If you had a question. Matter of fact, ATF took me on some of their hits to identify guns. Because they'd pull a gun out and they go, what the hell is this? I'm like, oh, that's a Sten gun. Where the hell did you get that thing? So it can be useful. I never got a lot of guff, and my friend base in the Bureau was always the gun guys, right? And it tended to be the violent crime guys. It tended to be the SWAT guys. That's just kind of who I was. I had one really good friend that I met when I was still in the Army, and he was a brand new baby FBI agent. We met at a course at a compound that I don't know if it really exists or not, if it's run by another government agency and what have you. But we got to be friends then, and I was applying for the Bureau, and we maintained a friendship the whole time. If somebody came to me with hey, I got this 69 grain 223 round, I want to put it through a 1 9-inch twist M4 with a 10-inch barrel, and if it got down to that level of nuance, I'd be the guy you'd come and talk to about it. But if you really dug in deep, I'd be like, I don't know, I got to call Mark, and I'd get on the phone, and I'd call my buddy. But that was the friendship base I had. So those were the people that were not going to give me crap about Second Amendment issues. It's funny, towards the end of my career, when Mr. Trump was running against Mrs. Clinton for the presidency, and there was a lot of talk at that point where she was talking about, well, we're going to go out and we're going to seize guns. We're going to start taking guns away from people. And I was thinking, only someone who's lived their whole life, their whole political life in a place like Washington, D.C. and New York can say something that dumb. Because he and I, Mark and I, would talk about these things, and like, you may think that's a good idea in New York City, and you may be able to get away with going out and seizing guns in New York City. But if you've ever been into the Carolinas and the East Tennessee, and you've been up in those hollers, you could lose an entire infantry brigade up there trying to take guns away from people, and ain't nobody coming back. There's just going to be a whole lot of backhoes going back and forth up there. I said, you tell me, if you give me a lawful order, go up, into western North Carolina, to Cherokee County, and start seizing guns. One, I'm not going to do it. And two, if you truck me up there and drop me off, I'm never coming home. Because them good old boys ain't going to put up with that garbage. And you're high as a kite if you think that it won't. So we would have these conversations in the office. And because we were very vehement about it, and because we were very well read about it and knowledgeable about it, there wasn't nobody going to jump into the middle of that conversation and go, but I heard, CNN said you should take all the guns and it'll end all the crime. And nobody was going to have that conversation with us.
Well, it's been my experience as a Second Amendment guy. The people that I don't find friendly to my line of thinking fall into a couple, maybe three categories, but most of them are either they believe something contrary to what I do, not because of personal experience, but because of influence over a period of time, or they just don't know anything about it. So their default position is to go with the propaganda and the stuff that's associated with the safety this and safety that, as if safety is contrary to the Second Amendment, right? So it's kind of funny. I remember when Obama was running for office, at that point he was not well known by anybody. I mean, nobody really knew him. And I can remember in Southwest Iowa, in the little town that I grew up, one of my family members went to the local country club to listen to Michelle Obama, who was on tour, doing these things, campaigning, stop by and speak. And because of the demographics, this was a place that they couldn't really fly over because they flew over all the places that were really lowly populated, right? And this was a rare time where they had to drive a significant distance to it, right? So they had to put 80 or 100 miles on it. Ordinarily, they would never do that, but there was just enough justification to go do that. And so they're sitting there, and this is a town of like 1,800 people, right? Mm-hmm. And I remember my family member telling me straight up, he's like, I listened to that woman say, when she got done with her spiel or whatever else, and they were all just kind of talking amongst one another, she's like, there's no room for an AK-47 in Chicago, but I could see how you might need one out here. And the guy was like, okay, this gentleman was like, hey, explain that. I'm not sure I understand. Well, I remember driving down here and it's dark. And she's like, and you drive for miles and only see a few lights here and there, that you might drive for a mile and not see another house or whatever else. And she's like, I can see out here why you might need protection and whatever else. And so when I heard this, I'm like, you recorded that, right? What do you mean did I record it? Well, You captured that somehow, didn't you? No. Why would I do that? I'm like, oh golly, something tells me that will be valuable someday. But anyway, I'll never forget him telling me that, and I thought, well, I think that they just don't understand, or they're just not giving it its full need for exploration, if you will. But maybe
it illustrates a really good point that a lot of that is, to my mind, is fear-based. It really is. And look, we can debate people's intentions and whatnot, but I'm going to just assume good intention on the part of people, that they want other people to be safe. They want people to not have these tragedies befall them. And I get it. I think we're all in that camp. Nobody likes a school shooting. Nobody feels good about that. Nobody's trying to encourage that. But I don't own guns because I'm scared. I doubt you do either. There's a whole lot of reasons that go into those decisions to own firearms, but fear is not the driving factor for me. I can't remember the last time I was really scared. It was probably when one of my kids came home late, and I didn't know where she was. That's not the driving factor, but it illustrates a lack of comprehension, a lack of understanding. And I think this is where a lot of our debates get really, really ad hominem. They get really, really personal, because neither side does a really good job of trying to understand where the other side is coming from. Now, I flatter myself by thinking our side is a little better about that sort of behavior, where we try to listen to what anti-gun people are saying. I know we may do that to try to debunk what they're saying, but at least you try to understand where they're coming from and have a legitimate discussion. I don't feel that I always get that same courtesy from people who come at me from a position of guns bad, gun ownership bad. And of course, I always laugh when people say, well, I don't want anybody, civilians don't need guns. They don't need this. They don't need that. But you're okay, TC, because you've had training and you've had, and I'm like, do you hear yourself when you're talking?
Yeah. Is that the dividing line? If it is, I really like to understand that.
I always reply, I'm like, don't forget that every gun I have ever pointed at another human being in my lifetime, every single one of them was given to me by the United States government. Every one of them. Every gun I own personally or ever have owned personally has never been pointed at another human being. Ponder that for a while.
I make the assertion to people on this program and other places that I'm one of the safest people that I know, because of the thought that has to go into what we're talking about here. You know what I'm going to say as I'm saying it here, but every conflict that I enter into is an armed conflict because I'm always carrying. So what that does for people like me and people who think like me is it makes us reconsider carefully and consider in the moment carefully how we're going to respond and what we're going to do, because we don't want any inherent trouble, period. And so if I see two morons about to scratch dirt together, whatever else, and do I really want to be in the middle of them? Chances are I do not. Or if somebody wants to scratch dirt with me, what's my best option? Leave. And so life becomes more simple for you when you're armed, because of all the prerequisites and responsibilities that naturally come with it. So it changes you. It changes how you think. It changes how you behave. It changes how you approach somebody. It changes your response to any given stimuli. It really does.
It does. There's an old saying that goes, doing the right thing isn't hard. Knowing the right thing to do is hard. I think having a firearm on your person simplifies knowing the right thing to do. To the point you were just making.
Yeah, without a doubt. I taught let's see, it was last month. I taught a men's ministry. We have a little once a month breakfast, right? And there's a Bible lesson, right? So I baited all these people. I sent these texts out the night before. I'm like, if you're really interested in learning the intersection of a person's free will and God's sovereignty, we're going to talk about it tomorrow at the men's ministry. And so there are quite a few people that showed up. I'm like, hey, if you came here this morning thinking I would outline for you what this intersection is, where it is, and what it looks like, I hope you're set for disappointment, because I'm not able to do any of that. So if you want to leave, now's the time. But basically what I tried to tell them was all the inputs that you make about these choices, these intersections that you think you're coming up against, whether you realize or not, I would argue are largely pre-made for you. And I'm not talking about God's sovereignty. What I'm talking about is your experiences, your inputs, those things that have been part of your life, whether you ask for them or whether they were thrust upon you, have shaped who you are and what you do. So build your integrity forward by doing quality things with yourself now, so that when you meet these intersections, which are going to come up unknowingly in your life, that you're far better prepared to handle them. I see it the same way for gun ownership. When you take that seriously, you're asking a lot of responsibilities into your life, and they require from you many things that you had and had not to do. But you're thinking through those, you're practicing those, and it's part of who you are. So arguably, you're in a better position to make good decisions on the fly and in the moment, because you've prepped yourself in a lifetime for that. Now, as somebody who studies, I mean, you have many accolades. Do you think that what I just said was hogwash, or is there anything to it? Because I'm convicted about it. I'm serious about it. So maybe I should ask, or maybe I don't want to ask you. Make me feel better about what I've just said.
I think you're hitting the nail right on the head. I mean, I come at it from a secular perspective, but the truth of the matter is what you're talking about is experience, right? Whether it's internal experience and thought and processing things beforehand, or actually having lived experience and gone through these things before. It's why guys like you, with as much, experience as you have displayed in your beard, tend to make better decisions than you did when you were 18, right? Because you were running into a lot of things for the first time, and you're making these decisions without a whole lot of prior thought. You're making without a lot of experience. And is it any wonder that we screw these things up? I mean, I have a son who's getting ready to become a teenager here shortly. And I tell my wife all the time, I says, we're going to the ER. So understand that it's going to happen. Well, no, not my little boy. I said, no, every man every adult male has scars. And every single one of us can tell a story, at least one story that starts with, yeah, I really don't know how I survived this, but this is what happened. Because we do stupid crap, because we don't put thought into it, and we don't have the experience to say, yeah, I wouldn't do that if I were you. The last time we did that didn't turn out too well. So the experience, and it doesn't necessarily have to come from your own experience, right? Yeah. Otto von Bismarck, with apologies to him, said something to the effect of, a fool learns from his own mistakes, a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. Yeah. And that's what you're talking about. You're talking about taking that experience, taking that knowledge, taking that prior thought, and applying it. And that's where a disconnect can happen to some people. But that's what you got to do, right? And that's what keeps us out of trouble. I mean, we've all seen the videos of guys getting into, what was your phrase, scratching dirt. They're having an argument, there's a road rage issue, and somebody goes back in their house, or they go back to their car, and they come back out with a gun, and bang, 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 and lives are ruined. Mm-hmm. Absolutely ruined. In a calm moment, if you ask the person with the gun, oh, do you ever do something like that? They go, oh, hell no, there's all kinds of reasons not to do that. But they don't apply that in the moment. And that's where training takes over. That's where experience takes over. Organizations like your own help out. You can't denigrate that knowledge and that experience.
I'd like to share your website onto the screen here. For those of you watching or seeing, and for those of you listening, this is TC Fuller, and that's Fuller, tcfuller.com. So you're a writer. Okay, so we've talked about the FBI just a little bit. We've talked about some modes of service. So I'm curious, how do you move from I'm a Second Amendment advocate, I want to shoot at targets, and I want to run around, I want to do all these things, I'm willing to sacrifice my my beach blonde hair and my fantastic tan in order to do some of these other things. When did that move into time in front of a computer screen and saying, I want to capture these things for posterity, I want to share these stories? Because that's quite a transition. That's quite a jump. They don't sound like they commiserate.
Yeah, but they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, let's face it, none of us are only Second Amendment people. We're not only gun people, right? That's just one, it's just part of our makeup. In many cases, a relatively small part. And two, to say otherwise is oftentimes used as a pejorative. It's used by our political opponents to paint us out as being, flat characters, not worthy of empathy. the truth of the matter is that's part of who I am, what I do with this world. But as I've gone along, one thing the FBI definitely taught me was if it ain't written down, it never happened. Right? I mean, think about in your own experience, your own lifetime, all the stuff that's happened in your lifetime that you've forgotten, or things that, every now and then somebody will say something, oh my God, I hadn't thought about that in years. Well, if you don't write it down, nobody else was there, nobody else knew it. It's lost for all time.
Yeah.
But what really tripped my trigger on getting into what I did my master's work on and my doctoral work on, which is improving the way we teach law enforcement officers to administer deadly force, was Colonel Grossman and his work in On Killing and later in On Combat.
Oh, yeah.
That really, really resonated with me. I eventually, when I started my master's work, I reached out to him and connected with him, and we kept up a correspondence for a few years because we learn all these things that he has to show us that he kind of codifies in his book On Combat about what happens to people in a deadly force scenario and kind of what happens leading up to it, during, and then after the fact. And we know, especially anybody who's served in any EMS capacity, any law enforcement capacity, any first responder capacity, but particularly law enforcement, we know what happens to people who go through these high impact events with improper training and how they end up, sometimes in very, very bad situations. And I thought, well, why aren't we changing our training paradigms to mirror what we know happens in these combat situations? And that, combined with my conversations with Colonel Grossman and my experiences in the Bureau, said, you know what? I don't have the capital T truths. I don't have the burning bush. I was lucky enough to climb Mount Sinai when I was stationed in Egypt, but I didn't come back with any deep, insightful information that apply to all men. But I do have a few thoughts on the topic. I do have some experience. I do have something to contribute to the conversation. And that's what inspired me to start writing stuff down. Because look, we have to have a starting point from which to debate, right? We need the information to kick around. And you and I aren't going to be here forever, buddy, right? We definitely have been to enough funerals at this point in our lives to know our time here is limited. And if we want to move this ball forward, if we want to help the people as yet unborn maintain their Second Amendment rights, to maintain their freedoms, and even to learn how to, function safely around a firearm, we need to pass on what little we have to say for them to build upon or to debunk, right? I mean, maybe somebody reads my book, No Safe Alternative, 50 years from now and goes, this is garbage, Or maybe they say, hey, it's deeply insightful and we can add this to what we already know in these other forums.
Well, I think that there are some really, really tough intersections that most people would either assume A, didn't exist, or B, would assume incorrectly, by the way, in my opinion, that these things have adequately been dealt with. And I'll give you an example, and I have no doubt that this is something that you either have an answer or response for, or something that you may have thought about quite a little bit. But I stood off to the side at a local law enforcement academy, which had, I don't remember, maybe 60 or possibly 70 students that were going through an academy. And I stood over to the side waiting for my opportunity to present and visit with these folks or whatever else. And I remember the chief instructor standing up there reminding these guys, because these folks were all going to be road cops, right? Or probably road cops. And he told them all, he's like, listen, it's this simple. On every traffic stop, when you walk up there, it's either you or it's them. And that was said over and over and over. And I'll admit to you freely, I got a really sick feeling in my stomach every time that I heard him say that, because I was there and I have been there since then. And I've heard it over and over and over. And it bothered the heck out of me that was being said and being accepted, because I didn't necessarily believe that to be a true statement, but it seemed as if it fit for the purposes of walking up to a vehicle that you don't know anything about and having to be prepared for whatever calamity may befall you, because calamity does befall you on some of these traffic stops that seem or start all the same with some guy pulled over, right? So regarding the statement on every traffic stop, it's either you or them. Do you have anything that you'd like to say about that? Because I don't mean to trap you in any way, TC,
No.
but I'm really curious what you have to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, in that environment from that instructor, I understand what he's trying to do. He's trying to drive home, I think, attributing pure motives to him. He's trying to drive home the point that this is a dangerous job, right? This can go sideways fast. But I think it's also an oversimplification. Now, it may be an oversimplification for purposes of time, and he only has so many minutes in front of these students. He's got to grab their attention. Okay. But it is an oversimplification, because the job of a road police officer is far more complicated than it's them or me. It's way more complicated than that. And these officers, and I'm sure he knew it, and these officers will learn it soon enough. I agree with you that that's a kind of a stomach-turning statement to know that the cop that's walking up on you to issue you a ticket for rolling a stop sign, is twitchy, and he's thinking, it's either you're going to die or I'm going to die. That's not how we want our police officers to interact with us, right? Because you're a good guy. Does he? I don't know. But I certainly don't want him coming up here thinking I'm going to smoke this guy out of his socks.
Well, I try and help every chance I get, and when I visit with friends, family, customers, whatever they may be, I'm like, listen, because some of them hear things like that, or they think about things like that, and they get really prickly really quick. I'm like, now hold on here a minute. Keep in mind how these guys' average day goes. They show up to a shift that's, oh, by the way, many of these departments have rotating shifts, so these poor guys never work 9 to 5 days, Monday through Friday. I mean, unless you have a bunch of rank, that's almost unheard of. So they're on crappy shifts, on crappy rotations. They've been on this for years. They'll be on this for years. So it's not an easy thing to have your life adhere to if you've got a wife and kids and other things that adhere to Monday through Friday days. You know what I mean? So right out of the chute, their lives are more complex and messed up than you could possibly imagine. Now this guy's been on shift. He's done everything. One of his buddies called in. The captain says, hey, Joe Smith ain't gonna make it. Can you pull a double? Yeah, I can do that. And so they're tired. They're strung out. You get pulled over because for whatever reason, and you're doing this stuff. You're flopping around in the seat. All he can see is you monkeying around doing stuff. And what are you really doing? Well, you're probably scrambling around to get your seatbelt on. He suspects that, but he may not know that. You also might be stashing a gun or pot or drugs or whatever else. He doesn't know. And you come up the window, and then you're one of these guys that cracks the window down an inch and a half and says, I don't answer questions. I don't comply, because that stuff does happen. Okay. What I try and do is I'm not going to say, no, I'm going to allow you to move past my civil rights. That is not going to happen. But I can help out. So, when they come up there, I've got the window all the way down. I got my hands palm up over by the side mirror. You know what I'm saying? So these guys can approach me with a little less potential trepidation. And then I'm like, okay, if you want me to get my license or whatever else, when they tell me it's in my chest pocket, can I grab that? My, registration's in the glove box. Can I grab that? Just so that there's a real communication line. Do I ever say I'm carrying a gun? No. I give them a permit or whatever else or something like that, so they come across these ideas organically, and it works better, and they can ask me about that. That's fine. But so I think that there are better ways to handle this than others. But you'd be surprised how many people never think about that. So I can see why an instructor would tell these guys it's you or them, because they've had too many other experiences that have led them to be forced to take that posture or to take that posture easily.
Or you end up burying a few of your friends. And if you do a career in law enforcement, you're going to bury friends. I mean, there's just no way around that. To your point about a traffic stop, I think it speaks to the fact that you have put some thought into it. A lot of people don't. I occasionally get pulled over as well, and I have a plan, and I adhere to it, and I have for almost 30 years. And like you, I have my certain things that I do, certain things that I don't do, certain things that I say. But again, it's based on thought and experience, and that's what you really ought to do, folks. I mean, a lot of this times dealing with police officers, if you just put some thought into it beforehand, try to put yourself in their shoes a little bit beforehand, whether you're right or wrong, whether you feel like you've been poorly handled by him pulling you over and you're late for an appointment and this is terrible or not, the time to hash that out is not the side of the road. Right? The time to prove that you are the superior intellect is not on the side of the road. There's old adage, the guy with the gun makes the rules. You may have a gun too, but today's the day to be courteous and polite. And frankly, courteous and polite will get you out of more tickets than anything else. It absolutely will. You know, and I beat it over my kid's head all the time. I don't care if you're right or wrong. That police officer is in charge when he pulled you over, and it's yes, sir, no, sir, right away, sir, terribly sorry, sir. Until they're old enough to kind of hash out exactly how they want to deal with the police officers. But again, you've made this point a couple times in the show. Experience, training, knowledge, and some sober reflection and thought will solve a whole lot of problems in this world.
Oh, without a doubt. We are quickly becoming a culture that doesn't think very much, and we don't have to. Every time we turn around, something's doing something for us, or we're hiring people to do something for us, or we're subscribing a service to help us write because we don't know grammar. You know, it doesn't matter.
Rude. You know, we're just rude to each other, and I don't understand that at all. Everybody seems to be okay with just being nasty to another person. I'm like, you know what? Please, thank you, yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am. Open a door for people. We're not all in the same boat, but we're all in the same ocean here. We're all just trying to get through this. Why make somebody else's life more difficult? Doesn't cost you anything to say yes sir, no sir, thank you. Goes a long way.
Was it Burger King or McDonald's that had the mantra for a while, your burger, your way? Do you remember which?
I remember Have It Your Way, the advertising from Burger King back when I was a kid. But
okay. I remember thinking about that at the time and dismissing it. And it wasn't long later I came back to that. I thought to myself, this isn't actually where society unravels, but it might be. And my wife, you know, will drive down the road. Great discussions you can have behind the windshield, right? Some of our most fantastic conversations are either pillow talk or on long drives, right? My wife's like, why would you say something like that? I said, because as more people decide that the only way that they're going to interact with somebody is on their terms, to their satisfaction, they're going to find themselves either A, closed off to everybody else, or B, incapable of dealing with anybody else because they're not going to get what they want their way all the time. They're almost never going to get what they want their way. So this is bound to go poorly overall. She's like, over a burger, Michael? I'm like, yes, over a burger. You don't understand what these things ultimately mean. You know, slogans matter. When Nike says just do it, they mean it. And what's our culture doing? We're just doing it. We haven't asked if it's a good idea. We haven't applied any inhibition. We haven't decided, should I actually be doing this? And oh, by the way, what are the ramifications for me having done it? None of it. Just go do it. Well,
just because you can doesn't mean you should, right?
Yeah, no kidding.
A little bit of tact, a little bit of courtesy, a little bit of politeness goes an awful long way, especially in this world.
Well, tell me about these books, man. We're an hour into this, and we haven't even touched on that. So I'm curious about what you're writing about, and I really want to try and understand, especially when I see Camp Delta, Guantanamo, my hackles go up. I'm like, that had to have been quite a work experience. So tell us about that.
It was that. Well, my book was called Empathy for the Devil, as you see here, and it did pretty well, and it's still out there selling. It was just about my time as an interrogator for the FBI at Guantanamo Bay. And it was very interesting. I mean, I looked at it as an absolute crash course in interrogation and interviewing because every single person I talked to down there, and I talked to usually 2 people a day for the whole time I was there, was some level of bad guy, you would think. Turned out it was much more complicated than that. And it was just a fascinating experience. And for me, writing it down, there's no great insight here, okay, because the government mandates and the FBI mandates that any book I write that has anything to do with the Bureau or my time in the Bureau has to go back to FBI headquarters for pre-approval. And that's a months-long process, 8-9 months. In the case of this particular book, it wasn't just the FBI that had a dog in the fight. So they had to farm it out to multiple government agencies, DOD, NSA, CIA. I mean, a whole bunch of agencies had, you know, their fingers on this particular pie. So they all had to approve everything. So what you ended up here with is a heavily redacted book. And there's no secrets in there. But funny thing is, if you ever get a copy of this, they sent me the transcript back and it had all the redactions in it. And it had all the redactions annotated with who redacted what. So I called back up to FBI headquarters. I'm like, okay, what do I do with this? There's all these heavy black lines through my stuff here, mostly put here by DOD. Do I have to go back and edit this stuff out, or can I just leave the black lines in, or what? And they're like, you can do whatever you want with it. You just can't publish the parts that we've blacked out. So, okay. So I left all the redactions in. So when you look at this book, you open it up, you'll find sections where it's all just my writing. And then you'll find a section where it's just line after line after line after line. It's been hashed out. And I did that because I wanted people to see, look, this is what redactions were made. And some of them, you can read it and from context, exactly what was redacted. You'll look at that and go, oh, they redacted the word orange. Oh, they redacted this word or that word. But I knew people that would read the book. And if I said, look, part of this has been redacted by the government, you start to make up, well, what's been redacted? What's been changed? What's been, people will fill that vacuum with their own thought processes.
Yeah.
So I wanted to leave it in there and say, look, this is what was taken out. Now I know what was there. And I know that when I wrote the book, I put nothing classified in that book because I don't want to go to prison. I'm far too pretty. And they're pretty serious about that. If you publish stuff that's protected under, TSSCI classifications, you will go away. But nonetheless, I think there's some kid who's 20 years old out of DOJ or DOD that decided, oh, I'm going to take this out, that out. He said puppy. He should have said dog. Erase that. But it's all in there. And I wanted people to see for themselves. Look, this is the guy trying to say what he says, and this is what the government thinks of. Do with that information what you will.
So empathy for the devil has a pretty strong implication for most people understanding the face value of those 4 words. So what would it be in summarization?
Well, for me, a lot of the people that were in there were straight up terrorists. Not all of them. Some of them got basically sold to the U.S. government because some people told them they were bad guys and turned out they weren't. But that was part of our vetting process that we put them through while we were there. But a lot of them, frankly, shouldn't have been breathing. They should have been shot on the battlefield, in my humble opinion. Now, I'm not emperor, so that didn't happen. That's probably a good thing. But just absolute dumpster fire of human beings. I mean, I talked to people that stoned people to death, beat people to death, put them in Connex boxes, like they were sending people off to Auschwitz, and then machine gunned the Connex box, locked it, and left everybody in there, wounded, dead, unwounded, just to cook in the Afghan sun for days on end until everybody was dead. I mean, just every possible human atrocity was perpetrated by people inside that compound. And for those who think that that's not the case, you clearly weren't there and didn't talk to these people. I did. But if you want to get information out of these people, a lot of folks will say, oh, the government's torturing people in Gitmo. Torture doesn't work. I mean, it works in the short term. If I wanted you to tell me if there's a machine gun nest at the end of your street and in which house it's in, and I start pulling your fingernails out, you're probably going to tell me, oh, yeah, there's a machine gun nest down there. If I want you to describe for me the financial arrangements and the money laundering involved in moving millions of Saudi dollars into terrorist coffers or Taliban coffers in the Afghan region, and I want you to talk to me through all of the bank accounts, where they are, what bank is dealing with what bank president is on the take, who's helping you launder the money. Torture isn't going to get that information out of you. Empathy is going to get that information out of you. Talking to you and convincing you to tell me the truth is going to get that information out of you. And that's not an easy thing to do with diehard, religiously motivated terrorist zealots. It's very difficult to do. And it takes time. But you have to be empathetic when you sit down and you talk to these people, because just yelling and screaming at them isn't going to it's just going to dig them in deeper. So that was the approach that I found worked best in that environment. And I thought that was a pretty good title. So that's what I went with.
I can edit this out if we find out later that you're not comfortable with it, but I'll ask it for the time being. You mentioned that that you grew up outside of the average mom and dad, mom working at home, dad doing this, 2.1 children with a dog, that you grew up outside that normal American genre high school or family life. Okay, so it wasn't Leave It to Beaver, and it's been my experience by my dad taught me, maybe it was genetic, I don't know, but my dad certainly taught me and showed me what empathy was, because he was very helpful for a lot of people, and he took me every place he went. I wasn't the kid that stayed at home playing video games, right? So I was taught and given examples of empathy, and that's helped me a great deal now. And it occurs to me that, or at least I think this, in order to truly be empathetic, you need to have tremendous amounts of suffering in your life and joy juxtaposed to one another, so you can truly understand these things. So you can feel with other people and for other people, and sometimes you may even find yourself taking part in their suffering in order to come alongside them. I say all that to ask the question: do you think by not having, probably I'm guessing, an easy childhood put you in a position where you could empathize better with these people so that you could gain an understanding, or is that part of who you are or not?
That's an excellent question. And I don't know that I'm necessarily the best person to answer that. I will say this, that I felt that I was able to convey empathy effectively in the four walls of the interrogation rooms. Why? Knowledge, training, experience, I guess, is what I would default to. I mean, the FBI does a good job of hiring basically the same person over and over and over again, and they look for specific qualities, and one of them is the ability to manipulate other people. You need to be good at that if you're going to get a pedophile to show you his child porn collection, which I've done. I've convinced pedophiles or preferential sex offenders is a better term, to, without a warrant, without the search, capability in my pocket, to just take it upon themselves to sit at their computer and show me their child pornography, their felonious child pornography. That takes a bit of manipulation in order to get people to do that. If you ever see a picture of my wife, you'll know that I'm clearly good at manipulating, because there's no way a woman as accomplished and as attractive as her would ever be seen in public with a guy like me. Yet here we are. So was it my childhood? I'm sure that contributed. In what meaningful way? I certainly couldn't testify with any degree of confidence. But, having lived over there in that part of the world, having fought these people, having dealt with these people, and having dealt with straight criminals, sociopaths, psychopaths, a lot of these guys fell into that category. I like to tell myself I experienced some success based on who I was when I sat down in that room. But could I point at specific events? It's probably a little outside my capability. Not my comfort. I'd be happy to talk about it if I thought that I could point to something. I just don't know that I can.
Oh, I wasn't looking for a pivotal event in life. I'm just saying that it seems like when we're more well-rounded, we can put ourselves, or if we're placed in those positions, when we put ourselves there, we find ourselves there. When we're there, we can find personal relates or professional relates or both that help us with empathization and all the things that may stem from that. So I was just a little curious about that, and I don't mean in any way, TC, to make assumptions about who you are based on a couple of snippets that you mentioned earlier in our conversation. I know you know that, but it needs to be said, because I don't want people to think that that's ordinarily who I am. I might be that kind of moron, but I hope to not be that kind of moron very often. And again, I can assume, and this is another assumption I think that it's safe for me to make, or somewhat safe. I probably don't want to play poker with you. Now, granted, you're not watching all of my body language, but I'm certain, given your acumen, you figured out who I am and who I'm not. So I don't want to play cards with you, dude. I just don't. But so are you a good poker player? I'm curious.
Well, the only people I play poker with are other FBI agents, and so that ends up being just a rather bloody situation. I will say this, though. My 11-year-old son relentlessly drubs me at Uno. So if that means anything. Okay. Not a lot of bluffing there. But
Uno's more about chance than making decisions. And then, like for me, if I ever actually get a good hand, I'm like, I'm all giddy, and everybody's like, fold. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I'm a terrible poker player. I don't wish to do it at all. So okay, is there anything that before we move? Is there anything exceedingly hairy or interesting or notable in your time at Gitmo that's okay for you to share?
Well, I ran into people that will recall the Gitmo time, there was an Army chaplain that got jammed up for passing information that he shouldn't have passed, or at least he was accused of doing that while he was down there serving as a chaplain to some of the detainees. I ended up running into him on a bus and shot the breeze with him for about a half an hour when my bicycle that I was riding broke down. So just to add a human element to things. As far as the people in there, I got to tell you, Mr. Ware, there were some nasty dudes. I mean, some really, really nasty dudes. And I can't really talk about specifically who they were, but some of them were pretty nasty dudes. And then, I also ran into a 15-year-old kid that they had incarcerated. He'd been caught with a gun on the battlefield. They scooped him up. They didn't know what else to do with him. They brought him to Gitmo. They gave him a couple years of, go Team USA, gave him USA foam finger and board games and talked to him and everything else. Eventually sent him back. The following year after I was in Gitmo, I was in Afghanistan, and he got caught in Afghanistan fighting against the U.S. again. And I begged and pleaded to get in a room with him and interrogate him a second time, only in Afghanistan. Because I'm like, oh, my God, I will break this guy. I'll get all the information from him. If he sees me after he saw me a year ago in Gitmo, he'd think, oh, my God, they brought this guy in here just to talk to him. Please, boss, let me talk to him. Never got to talk to him again. Small world, right?
I guess so. I don't know. I mean, there are a few people that I would like to get lined up to interview that I haven't had any success with yet, that maybe, but this is largely, at least I think so. It appears to be anyway. I think that some of these things are largely misunderstood by the American public. The resolve of some of the enemies that our country or our way of life represents. These people are truly dedicated in ways that most Americans don't understand to the snuffing out of Western culture.
Yeah, I relate in the book, and I've talked about it before. There was a guy that I sat down with in there. He was a big dude. And they would regularly bring them in with what we call belly bands, right? There's a chain around their waist, and they're handcuffed to that chain in the front, but they're handcuffed to it. And that chain then runs down another chain to ankle cuffs. And so they're hobbled with cuffs around their ankles as well as cuffs on their hands. When they would bring them into the interrogation room, it was up to me what level of restraint they would be under in the room with me. And I always started the same way: leave the cuffs on, leave the shackles on. And there was a big, heavy duty steel eye bolt in the floor of each room. And I would have their leg chains bolted to that or shackled to that eye bolt. And then they would sit in a chair and we would talk. And this one guy, the first time I sat down with him, and he just looked like he'd been in and out of prison his whole life. I mean, he just looked that way. He had that ambiance about him. And he told me through the interpreter, he said, look, it's a good thing you didn't unchain me. He says, if you unchain me, I will kill you. And I will kill every American I can find. If you ever let me out of here, I will kill every American I ever find anywhere in the world until the day Allah takes me home. And I didn't doubt him. He'd been locked up in the Middle East by other countries that didn't like his way of thinking. He'd been tortured by all those other countries. I mean, real world, legitimate, punitive torture. He was just a lost cause. In terms of Islam, and jihad, he was probably right up there, top of the heap. In terms of a threat to Americans, you do not want him in the mall with you. You absolutely didn't. And he should never breathe free air again, based solely on his actual actions that got him landed in Gitmo. Because, of course, we had a file on him. I read the file. He's a horrid human being. Absolutely horrid.
Well, where do these people end up?
Sir?
Where do these people end up, TC?
Well, Gitmo's empty now, right? Or pretty close to empty. I think they're down to like 6 or 7 people. They went home. Now, the rumor was the Russians weren't playing that game. The rumor that was rife when I was there, and I have zero proof that this happened, so don't ask me to testify. I don't know. Wasn't there, didn't see it. The rumor was that when the Chechens were released, like anybody, when you were released from Gitmo, you went back to the country from whom you had a passport. So if you were a Chechen, for example, you had a Russian passport. So you got sent home to Russia. Well, 20 years ago, the Russians and the Chechens weren't getting along very well. And so, again, This is just a rumor, but the Russians flew home some Chechens on an American aircraft with whatever the modern equivalent of the KGB is. It's GRU or FSB or whatever they're called now. Officer on board the American plane that took them home in military aircraft. And what I had heard was that the Russians said, hey, at what point in the Russian airspace can we open the door and throw these guys out? And the Americans were like, yeah, we're not doing that. He's like, okay. And apparently, and again, this is a rumor, I can't stress this enough, each guy, when they finally did land in Russia, they take each guy, and of course they're shackled and they have a blacked out mask on and earmuffs while they're on the American flight. Well, as soon as you step foot on Russian soil on the ground on the tarmac, they snatch the stuff off him, start talking to him in Russian, take him to a van, throw him in the back of the van, slam the door, and you hear it. Then they go in, they get the next guy, march him off, do the same thing, throw him in the van. They took 7 guys off the aircraft, and that was that. Now, did that happen or not? I don't know, but you got to admit it's a pretty effective way of preventing recidivism. Different countries have different approaches. I don't know what happened to the ones that went back to Muslim countries. I just don't.
I'm not sure I've got any response for that. I'll have to think about that for a little while.
The long and the short of it is some of those people are back in the wind. I have no doubt. Some of those people went back to countries and they're back. And understand something. Gitmo just wasn't full of Russians, Chechens, Afghanis, Iraqis, and Saudis. There were Americans, Brazilians, Australians. They were from all over the world. I mean, it was truly a global jihad. Now, not in huge numbers, but they were there. Mm-hmm. So don't think for a minute that it's only a particular ethnic demographic, because it's not.
Man, heavy stuff. I'm glad that we're talking America. Yeah, well, it's out there. That's the other thing. Okay, so I mentioned on this program before, we need to be prepared individually. I mean, that's just the core of the Second Amendment, is a call to be proficient and practice with your firearm so that you can aid yourself, aid the neighbor, come to the aid of the country. That's implicit. It's in the Second Amendment. And I think we're not doing a good job as Americans, whether you advocate for the Second Amendment or you despise it, to take heed of what's being said. You are responsible for your security and potentially it's the security of others when you're asked, which means you have to be proficient. You have to think. You have to practice. You have to be prepared. And TC, we're not. I don't have very many neighbors that are prepared for the local grocery store to run out of electricity. I mean, they may not have 3 days worth of food in their home, much less be proficient with taking care of themselves, have any situational awareness when they walk in the mall or to a football game or whatever else. We're not doing any of these things the way that we had ought to do. And it gives me a great deal of concern. I've got to tell you, I'm really bothered about that.
Well, I think the basis of it is to understand that the threats do exist. To take blinders off and take a good hard look at what the threats are. You know, you live in Iowa, probably not a big threat of earthquakes there, but there are other threats there, right? So look around you and pay attention to where you are and to your situation, and then base your preparations, whatever they may or may not be, on your own reality. But the first thing you have to do is recognize reality. You have to understand that, look, on 9/11, those hijackers did not ask, well, are those buildings full of Second Amendment people? Are they only full of white people? Are they only full of Christians? They didn't ask those questions. They didn't matter. They absolutely didn't matter. So the differences that we paint ourselves into in this country, the balkanizations that we are self-inflicting, have no impact on whether or not one of these people will hurt you. Zero. They do not care. You are a target to them simply because you are an American. You know, you can accept that or you can ignore that. That's up to you.
Painting over rust.
Painting over rust. That one is basically a memoir of my 20 years in the FBI. And it's how they make the sausage. You want to get a look at the inside of one man's experience inside the Bureau? I start you out at the academy and I work you all the way through till I leave. I worked for 4 directors. I talk about all 4 of them. I met all 4 of them at one time or another while I was in. I talk about the academy experience. I talk about how the FBI runs recruitment. I talk about some cases. There's humor. There's tragedy. It's a laugh a minute, and I laughed, I cried. It was better than Cats.
Well, okay, so book titles are carefully chosen. And when I read Painting Over Rust, I immediately don't get the warm and fuzzies.
It's funny. I came up with that title probably my first year or two in the FBI. I'm a firm believer that cynicism comes from frustrated passion. And I noticed early on that there was a lot of cynicism in the senior agents in the FBI. And when you're young, you kind of put it down to these grumpy old men. They're all just grumpy, and the old women, they're just grumpy. But what I eventually figured out was that you come in and you've got very high hopes, you've got lofty goals, and you think, the FBI, man, I have arrived. I am here. We're going to do great stuff. And then I sat down on my computer and was given a computer that was running Windows 3.1, and it was 1998. So I had a 10-year-old operating system on my computer. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. This isn't what's on TV. What's on TV, I should be able to see all the closed circuit TV cameras anywhere in the United States, and I should be working off a Cray supercomputer, and it should be going lightning fast. No, none of that was true. And so you figure out pretty quickly that like so many bureaucracies around the world, the FBI succeeds in spite of its bureaucratic infrastructure. It like so many organizations, it relies on the people to get the job done. And the structures that were there oftentimes would get in the way. And I have a couple of stories in there that I relate to, anecdotally illustrate what the point I was making. But I used to tell people in the bureau, I said, someday I'm going to write a book about this organization. I'm going to call it Painting Over Rust, because, you don't want to embarrass the bureau. That's a big thing. That's a big saying. Never embarrass the bureau. So we're all out here buffing and polishing and shining this thing and painting it, but we're not fixing some of the baseline issues that we have. Like, for example, one of them that I talk about is the lack of management training. We have an organization in the FBI that trains law enforcement executives all around the world. I was fortunate enough to be able to go through the National Academy as a counselor towards the end of my career. And we bring in people for, 16 weeks and train them on how to lead their organizations, how to be a manager in their organization, how to deal with the media, how to do all these things that managers do. There is zero management training in the FBI internally. Leaders don't train our leaders. You want to get promoted in the FBI, you put your hand in the air. And since we typically run 10 to 20% short on management bodies in the FBI, you'll get promoted. Now, maybe not for the betterment of the organization, but you'll get promoted. And that's how you end up with people like some of the folks we've seen in the media over the last 5 or 10 years that are just completely showing their ass while they're, I apologize for the language, while they are in a leadership position in the FBI. And you just kind of shrug your shoulders and go, how did you get to that position? And yet you're doing things like texting your mistress about how much you hate this guy that's running for president and how you're going to try and stop him. What is wrong with you, dude? If we had some leadership training for the people in leadership positions, perhaps somebody would have weaned him out earlier on, strained him out, run him out of the fort, cut off his buttons, break his saber, kick him out. But they don't do that. And I struggle to understand why. If you're in the Army, for example, and you want to go from an enlisted position to a non-commissioned officer position, you want to go from E4 to an E5. When I was in, you had to go to what they called PLDC. It's got a different name now, but it's a basic leadership school. Yeah. And then if you wanted to go from E5 to E6, you had to go to the basic NCO course, BNOC, and a course on leadership. And if you wanted to go from E6 to E7, ANOC, advanced NCO course, E7 to E8, first sergeant. So there's all these leadership boxes you have to check to get promoted. And that's in addition to, oh, you want to go to ranger school, you want to go to jump school, you want to go to airsoft, you want to go to all these other schools, training and leadership programs. The FBI has nothing like that. Nothing. And I think that is a gross mismanagement of the organization.
Well, you know this, but maybe some of the other folks out there that don't travel in law enforcement circles, it's my impression, as not a Leo, but it's my impression that if you don't have an understanding of circling the wagons, you're never going to understand law enforcement, because if something bad happens, I mean, these guys literally circle the wagons immediately. And what's too bad, and this isn't a swipe at law enforcement, it's just a swipe against all of us because we don't do this aspect of our lives well. But when we know that somebody's a problem and there are serious concerns that should be addressed, or that this person truly had not being among us, what do? We almost never handle that. We almost never do anything about that. And so it's not a shock or a surprise when most of these guys screw up or do something that becomes very public. But my criticism isn't simply that we know something about it and we don't do anything. It's the criticism that, especially law enforcement, they circle the wagons immediately. And maybe that's instinctual. Maybe that's what they have to do. I'm not sure I know. But it remains a criticism. I wish that they were able to say, yeah, this guy's a real piece of work. And we probably should have done something about it a long time ago. And I just don't ever hear that. I don't ever see that.
And sadly, I think it is part of the human condition. I really do, because you see it in multiple professions, right? You don't see MDs wanting to testify against MDs and drug people from the Corps. You don't see lawyers casually trying to disbar other lawyers. So you see it in a lot of professions. I agree with you. I don't think it's appropriate in law enforcement. I mean, certainly you want to be loyal to your people, but honestly, nobody hates a bad or a dirty cop more than a good cop. Mm-hmm. We just need to be better about how we define that. And, there's concerns about fairness for the public, and there's concerns about fairness for the individual involved. And you have to address that on both sides. Because, if you don't take care of your people, then you're not going to have people, right? I mean, if you're not loyal to folks, if you're going to throw the baby out with the bathwater every time something difficult comes along, it's going to impact your recruiting numbers, as we're seeing it now, right? I mean, how would you like to be the chief recruiting officer for the Minneapolis Police Department right now, or the Baltimore Police Department? I mean, that's got to be a tough job. It's got to be a tough job. And part of that is because there's a perception of a lack of loyalty on the part of management and on the part of prosecutors. So it's a real problem, because you do need to get rid of the bad seed. You do need to be seen as not circling the wagons around anybody simply because they're wearing the badge. But how do you split that baby? I don't know that I have the wisdom of Solomon there, buddy. I don't know that I can.
Well, the Solomon didn't have to cleave the baby.
He did.
People were eventually able to come around and say, okay, all right, and it ended up taking care of itself. I think back, as a Christian, I think of, I don't remember the verses. Maybe it's 15, 20, somewhere down there in Matthew chapter 18. There is a written explanation on how you handle somebody that's sinning or there's a problem with. And oh, by the way, if that doesn't work, then here's method number 2. And if that doesn't work, here's method number 3. And so while I'm sitting here criticizing the law enforcement community for not effectively dealing with the problems that they know are present, I don't believe that there's any substantial difference outside of law enforcement than there is inside, because I don't see a tremendous downturn in sin within devout church circles compared to outside church circles. So I don't think that we're doing that very well as a populace, but we could do better about that. I have no doubt.
And I think a big effort on the part of law enforcement should always be to strive. And I think that is what most organized religions would like to see in their adherents is, not necessarily perfection, but certainly an attempt at perfection, striving towards betterment, striving to be better. And I think that we should. And just because it's difficult doesn't mean we shouldn't try. So
Well,
a legitimate critique of law enforcement, I think, is appropriate, and it should be ongoing.
so if I move forward to this other book, No Safe Alternative, so you know, that title doesn't give me the heebie-jeebies like the other two did. But the subtitle has me very concerned. Improving how we teach cops to kill. That was not a mistake. That was well chosen on your part. So unpack that for us.
Of course. So no safe alternative. So that's a phrase that you'll typically hear when law enforcement officers actually fire their weapon at somebody. Some version of I had no safe alternative in that moment. Improving how we teach cops to kill. I picked that, and I've gotten a lot of pushback on that, which is fine because I picked it to be deliberately. What's the word I want to use? Thought-provoking, provocative. Yeah, that's probably a better word. Because that's what we teach people, right? Look, I get it. I've spent a lot of time teaching officers. We don't shoot to kill. We shoot to stop. All right. We don't shoot to wound. We shoot to stop. You've conducted, you being the bad guy, are conducting yourself in such a way that I have no safe alternative but to fire my firearm at you in an attempt to stop your behavior. But the truth of the matter is we're using deadly force to do it. And it often results in death or serious bodily injury to the person that we're shooting at. And if we're going to teach police officers to do this, using antiseptic phrases like administer deadly force, it tends to paint over the fact that we're teaching you to shoot a gun at another human being with the intent of hitting them. And there is no way to sugarcoat the idea that if you hit somebody with a firearm, you should understand going into it. You might not kill them. If it's a handgun, you probably won't kill them. But the truth of the matter is you could. And you have some control over what that will happen. But we should never, ever, ever make the mistake of looking at a firearm as anything other than a deadly weapon. All right? You just shouldn't. And that was kind of my point to writing this book and that particular title was to get your attention, to be provocative, to make you think, oh my God. And I've lost sales because of that book. I'm the first to tell you, because of that title. People see that and go, oh my God, can't teach cops to kill. I've had pushback from law enforcement officers, and I'm fine with that because now we're going to have a conversation. And that's what we need to do. We don't discuss this as often as we should. It doesn't get kicked around as much as we should. I make the point repeatedly in this book that if you and I are on a police department and a third guy on our department shoots somebody, ends up in a deadly force scenario, and that person dies, they kill that person. And that person's a 15-year-old kid. We know it happened, and you and I will talk about it all day long. Well, I heard this, I heard that, this is going on, that's going on. But talking to that officer individually, that's where we fall down, right? That's where we have all kinds of issues because there's legal concerns, there's civil concerns. He doesn't want to talk about it. Maybe he does desperately want to talk about it, but he can't in the environment he's in. He can only talk to certain people. But maybe he and you and I, we're three peas in a pod, right? We've been buddies since high school, and now we're on this department together. But now we can't talk to him about this single largest event in his lifetime, and it's impactful in all kinds of ways, personally, professionally, and everything else. And we can't talk to him about it. We are his support network. We can't discuss it with him without running the risk of getting him in trouble or getting ourselves in trouble or embroiling all of us now into a legal quagmire that none of us want to be in. We want the best for him, but we can't get it out of him. We can't talk to him. We can only talk to him in certain nice ways, and we got to dance around the topic. We don't train people going into this as well as we should. Right? We don't discuss with officers, hey, look, can you shoot another human being? We don't ever have that conversation as part of the recruitment or training environment. Nobody ever sits down with a cop. I mean, talk to your law enforcement buddies. Ask if anybody in their training and recruitment process ever sat them down and said, look, we're going to give you a gun, not because it's cool, not because it's a symbol of your office. We're going to give you a gun because you may need it. You may need it, and it may be the only solution to the problem you have at hand. One of our requirements is that you run to the sound of the guns. You run to a violent scenario. You attempt to intervene in the case of interpersonal violence. And that may mean deadly force is used. We don't have that conversation. We certainly don't then say to them, and oh, by the way, if you actually do use deadly force, we're going to take your gun, we're going to read you your rights, and you're going to go through a homicide investigation. We don't have that conversation with people. Very rarely do we talk to people about stuff like that. And
Well,
I go over all this in the book.
it's a retreat from empathy, and your other book title contained empathy, so that you could do your job, or as a result of your job, or both, because it's part of who we are. It's a basic human interaction. So it was necessary when you were interrogating people so that you could understand things, and get to where you needed to be, which was the access to information, and information that happened to be true or believed to be true. And now we're saying we're not willing or able or set up to empathize with people who truly need it, and need it the most at the moment. So it's predictable. It's a bit of an oxymoron, but it is a little predictable, because what we're really talking about, whether anybody here understands it or not yet, is we're talking about the foundation of love. That's what this works. That's how this works. If we're not willing to love a fellow cop, especially somebody who's been in a position no person wishes to be in, and we're not willing to say, okay, why did this come to pass? What love is present in carrying a firearm? I mean, you mentioned it earlier. I don't intend to kill anybody. If I have to stop a threat, or if I choose to, because I may not stop a threat, but if I choose to, what do I do after the threat stop? I immediately pivot into life-saving mode. I'm doing chest compressions. I got somebody on the blower with 911. I'm relaying over information so the first responders know what they're dealing with when they get here, and they can become prepared. Those are all foundations and loving acts. Whether anybody actually understands that or not, they should. That's what these things stem from. We suffer from a chronic lack of love in the world, and it doesn't matter whether it's you know how the Greeks would say, okay, agape is like God's love. It's overarching. It's everything. Okay, so eros is romantic love, or stargate is familial love. Well, I'm primarily talking about, just from the purposes of me walking up to you, TC, in a parking lot of a department store, and saying, "Hey, buddy," and you were saying, "Hey, buddy," back, and then we keep walking, right? Well, that's the foundation of philia, brotherly love. And we don't do any of that anymore. We skip it every chance we get, because we just do. I'm not sure I understand why. I used to think I knew why, but we're trending away from it in whatever regard. And I'm not happy about it. I'd like to see a change. I'd like to see the net philia in the world elevate. And we're able to do that in a Western culture like ours. Whether you call that Western Europe through most of North America or not, we're able to do that because we live in a great place and a great time with very few concerns. Yet, I think we're doing a horrible job of the easy stuff, TC. I mean, has that been your experience? I mean, you're littered with modern academia titles and whatever else. Do you think that I'm wrong about that?
No, it's definitely an erosion. Frankly, it's one of the reasons I like living in the South, is because people do say, "Hey, how you doing? Good morning. How are you?" I was walking out of a donut shop yesterday, picked up some donuts for the family. I was leaving. The guy saw that I had a jacket on that said something about being a veteran, combat veteran. I'd never seen this guy before, probably never seen him again. And this may shock those that want to play race politics. He's a black guy. He stops me and goes, "Hey, thanks for your service, pal." I'm like, "Hey, my pleasure, buddy." And that was that. That was the whole interaction. But tell me that our lives weren't better for it. His, mine, and anybody that heard it, right? Mm-hmm. But that's not going to make the news. Look at this. Oh my God, interracial relations are going well in South Carolina. You know, that's not going to be newsworthy. But there needs to be more of it. And I enjoy living in a part of the world where that is true, because I've lived in New York and it wasn't true there. What you were saying is exactly the way my experiences ran up there. If you said hello or good morning or how are you to somebody, the first thing to do is grab their wallet and looked at you suspiciously.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the basis for why I wrote this book. It's like, we need to do better. We owe more to these people that we are putting into a position to defend all of us in our society. We owe them an honest conversation, because they're doing a difficult job so that the rest of us don't have to.
Yeah.
And the least we can do is prepare them as best we can for what will inevitably happen to some of them. We can't predict who, we can't predict when, but we can predict it's going to happen. So the only responsible thing to do is to prepare them all and to train them appropriately and give them a good, clear vision of what we know, not based on anecdotes only, but based on solid research, what you're going to experience before they actually experience, so that they can deal with it while they're experiencing it, and so that they can prevail after the fact, so that we don't have them embracing self-destructive habits, and going down destructive paths, so that they may prevail in the moment, but they ultimately fall after the fact. If we can prevent any of that through more effective, better constructive training, then we should. And more than we should, we owe that to anybody who puts on that uniform and picks up that badge.
Well, what you're suggesting is the foundation for everything that we'll probably do in life, whether it's raising kids, whether it's interacting with another person in the workplace, whether it's playing an organized sport. It doesn't make any difference. I don't know if you're a Christian or not, but if you're not, or if you are, you may be familiar with it. If you're not, you should open up Deuteronomy chapter 6 and go down there. I think it's like, I don't know, it starts like maybe verse 4 or 9, somewhere in there, but it's called the Hero Israel. And it's laid out there for you how you ought to do this. This is how you do it. This is how often you do it. And this is the circumstance. And it's basically saying, train your kids up morning, noon, and night. And this is how it's going to work. And if you do that, I would like to believe that you're arguably helping them be in a better position with these experiences, with these inputs, whatever else, to make better character decisions on down the line. And they're going to have them the rest of their lives. Every decision you make is a character decision because you're doing it. And I don't think that we look at it that way. I really wish that we did, TC. I really wish we did.
Well, got to start somewhere, right? Got to influence your own sphere. And I think you're doing a bang up job putting it out there, getting out here on this podcast and doing what you can with what you got.
Well, thank you. I'll take that. Now, everybody, just as we wrap up here, tcfuller.com, tcfuller.com. You can buy these books. You can pick these things up. You can read them. Also, just so you know, he's got some interesting, he's not calling it a blog. He's calling it musings, which I thought was wise, by the way. But I read down through a few of those and I really enjoyed those. I have a number of people that I'll be putting this on an email and sending it around to circulation because there's some interesting things there to consider. I especially was read in immediately on the 9mm versus others. I'm not going to tell anybody listening to this or watching this how that goes, but it's worth a read. And I happen to agree with your findings, by the way.
Or how emotional people will get over caliber selection.
Oh, yes.
It's absolutely hysterical to me. And people will get, they get so wrapped up about it. I used to see people at the FBI Academy in the firearms training unit would get wrapped up around caliber arguments.
Yeah.
And in full disclosure, I carried a Glock 21 for, 14, 15 years in the FBI. Started out with a Glock 22. That was my issue weapon. And then went to a 21 when I was able. And then eventually made another choice later on, which, again, I'm not going to give it away so people read. But, and we've all been there for these conversations, especially those of us that were around in the 90s. Remember all the gun magazine arguments between 9mm versus 45?
Oh, without a doubt. Oh, yeah. And
shiploads of ink were spilled on that.
Oh, it's trending to the point now where you can pick up a 40 caliber semi-automatic for Tinker Toys. I mean, I can trade a bag of oranges for one. I mean, you can't hardly give them away. And people are like, okay, well, I guess that one's not popular anymore. It doesn't appear to be that way, at least not in my neighborhood. So
So, end of the day, even with a 40 cal or a 22 or a 500 Smith & Wesson, it's all about shot placement, buddy.
Yeah.
Okay,
so you're an FBI guy, and the FBI used to compile statistics, I think, every 2 years on armed events and shootings, whatever else. I don't remember the name of the report, but I want to say in 2016 or 2018 they quit. I wish that they still did that, because it was really interesting to read out of all these shootings what led to mortality, what calibers they were, breaking down these statistics by whatever else. And then I think you'd be in a position to know this off the top of your head. I'm pretty sure it was like 11% of the FBI's findings ended in mortality for a firearm. And then people are like, well, that sounds pretty low. I'm like, well, I'm not saying that that's what you should count for or not account for, but what I am saying is for the guys out there that are involved in edged weapon problems, that mortality shoots to 40 you're talking about. I'm like, well, I thought it was over 70%. So I'm like, well, why? I'm like, dude, when you sever something major in terms of artery, whatever else, you leak out. I mean, you just do. And they're like, are you advocating carrying knives? I'm like, no. I'm not saying that should be a primary. The problem with the knife is you got to be able to touch somebody in order to make it work, and I don't want to be that.
Firearms can be used at distance, and you miss a lot. You don't tend to miss quite so often with a knife,
right?
And the human anatomy is just not made up to survive, having things thrust through important parts of your body.
Yeah,
it's just not. But like I said, and like we all know, it's all about what gets hit, not less so about what you hit it with, but it's definitely about what gets hit. And whether you hit it with a crowbar, a 45, a 9mm, a knife, a car, it's less material.
No kidding. Well, I appreciate it. I really have appreciated this conversation. I appreciate you taking the time. I mean, I realize that you mentioned that you're concluding professional life in one capacity, but that doesn't mean that you've got 2 hours to sit around and shuck and jive all the time. So your time is precious. It's away from your family. I'm curious, what kind of dog do you have?
It is, you can tell, right, from every time somebody knocks on my door. It is part, what is she? She's a black and tan coonhound and sneaky neighbor dog. So she's got, she's kind of low slung, but she's got the colorations that you typically see from a black and tan coonhound or a Doberman for people that are more familiar.
Yeah.
But she's got that coonhound bark, as you can tell, which is really all I need from her. She's worthless in terms of attacking somebody.
Yeah.
But if you cross her curtilage, she's going ballistic, and that's all I need.
Hey, that's what most dogs are good for, alerting. Most of the dogs that I've been around are probably, their owners are romantic. My dog would protect me. I'm like, no, your dog won't. But your dog could be one with a tennis ball or probably ground beef.
Right.
But we don't need to go to that. But will they alert? You betcha. And that's what
all
you're
I
looking
need. For. I just need her to alert. When the Amazon shows up or the neighborhood kids want my kids to come out and play, that's all I need from her. Middle of the night, anything goes Twitch, we're good. After that, I got this. So
I appreciate it. Again, TC, Dr. TC Fuller. That's tcfuller.com. Everybody go check these things out. Pick up these books and read them if you want to have a better understanding of things and want to know things you may not have known before, or maybe you want an assumption corrected, and you should want that, by the way. Again, the website was very simple. Check out the musings. Very thought-compelling stuff, and it was worth your time. I enjoyed reading it. TC Fuller, thank you very much for coming on IFC's Warrior Wednesday. If you need anything from Iowans, if you're coming to the neighborhood, want to be part of what we're doing, let us know. We'll help you any way that we can.
I absolutely will, Michael. Thank you so very much for having me on. I hope it was some value added for you and your audience. Thank you so much.
Very much so. Thank you, sir.